Hi, great. Okay, great to see everyone. My name is Barb Jacobson. I'm coordinator of Basic Income UK. This is a webinar which is hosted by Unconditional Basic Income Europe, which started in 2014 after a European Citizens Initiative for Basic Income and is preparing to do another one. Yeah, so we're here from the UK, from Scotland and England at the moment, but we've also had really great compadres in Northern Ireland and in Wales for this. One reason that we're here is because we have managed to win quite a bit of political support for an emergency or now a recovery basic income. So we'd like to talk about how we've done that, and each of the panelists will talk about, their involvement with that and how they got involved. Maybe a little bit about how they got involved with basic income as an issue. So I'd like to welcome Maggie. If you could just introduce yourself a bit, and you have to turn your microphone on.
Hello, my name is Maggie. I live in Brighton on the south coast of England. I'm part of Basic Income South East that was set up a few months ago. In the last couple of months, we've set up a petition to our local council calling for a basic income trial, which has now received enough signatures so that it will go and be debated at the next full council meeting in July. Personally, I also head up an organisation called Mothers Uncovered, which supports mums, particularly new mums, to help restore their sense of well-being after having had a baby. Many studies have shown that women are the ones that suffer most from lack of funds due to spending a lot of time doing caring work, either for children or a lot of the time for older members of their family, or just in caring jobs which are not properly valued. So for mothers, it's of particular importance that basic income comes in and can support them so that they can look after their children, which is, after all, work, as Erin will back up. It's not just something they're doing for the fun of it. They are raising the next generation of society. And for anyone who thinks that somehow mothers' work is niche and unrelated to the rest of the world, this is nonsense, because every single person on the planet has or had a mother. So we're talking about how society operates.
I'll unmute myself. Yeah, Erin, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Any strange noises? That is not me. That's the small baby next to me. My name's Erin. I'm here today on behalf of the UBI Lab Network, which is a network of groups predominantly in the United Kingdom, but around the world, who exist to promote and research and discuss basic income in their areas. I'm also a Labour councillor in Kirklees, which covers an area of West Yorkshire in the north of England, and we founded UBI Lab Kirklees last year. I sort of came to basic income, so my main interest really is similar to Maggie, how basic income could and would and has affected particularly women and children and families, because I believe that that's an area which is under-researched, but where there's the potential to really revolutionise who we value and how we value them. So that's an area of particular interest to me, but obviously all things basic income are of interest to me as well. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Great, thanks. Jamie?
Thanks, Barb. I'm Jamie Cooke. I'm head of RSA Scotland and also an executive committee member for BN, Basic Income Earth Network. And it's great to be able to join the discussion today, because I think, although we're in very chaotic and challenging times with COVID-19, in terms of basic income, we're seeing some really exciting discussions and opportunities, as Barb mentioned earlier. And I think it is a significant opportunity for us to push this debate forward. For me, I first got involved in basic income in 2016. And I will be quite honest and say it wasn't because I saw it as a policy that I thought we could deliver. It seemed for me a useful provocation around the failings that we have in Scotland and the UK around social security and the welfare state. But actually, the more that I've worked with it, the more we've seen the debate and the interest explode in Scotland and elsewhere, the more it seems to me it's the essential component of creating a new foundation for a new social contract. And I think COVID-19 has shown that even more so than we were talking about previously. The impact of insecurity, of the challenges that many people face have been thrust into the spotlight because of this terrible condition. For me, I think it's really exciting in Scotland because we came into this particular crisis with a Scottish government who were very interested in basic income as an idea, had commissioned a feasibility group who'll be publishing a report in the summer to look at what experiments and pilots could look like in Scotland. But for me, I think the current crisis has really shifted the energy and the focus of the debate away from the idea of basic income as an experiment towards one of basic income as an actual policy. So you'll have seen the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, saying that if she had the powers, which we don't as it stands in Scotland, she would deliver a UBI now. Now, we can always question politicians and the ability to deliver things they're unable to deliver. But I think the interest from her, from the Scottish Government, from across the political spectrum is really exciting. And it feels for me that certainly in Scotland, but also working with our colleagues across the rest of the world, this is a really big chance for us to push the debate forward and actually see practical policy delivery.
Thank you, Jamie. Cleo, do you want to introduce yourself and stuff?
Hello, yes, I'm Cleo. So I'm Director of Citizens Basic Income Network Scotland. I'm based in Edinburgh, and I'm also the co-founder of the Basic Income Conversation, which is a new organisation that's part of the think tank Compass. I actually first heard of basic income when I went to a TED talk that Jamie delivered, I think 2016. And yeah, I don't know, for me, it was just, of course, this is what we should be talking about. We talk about so many social issues that are caused by a lack of access to income, a lack of access to money, and we talk about why those things exist, but we never talk about just giving people money. And that was the first time I'd heard of the concept, and it just completely reframed everything for me, and I didn't want to stop talking about it at that point. I later got involved with Citizens Basic Income Network Scotland. I've been their volunteer director for a couple of years now. And then luckily I got a paid job, so I have some form of a basic income in a strange roundabout way, and get to do a lot more work about it at the moment. And I think it's important to note that not many people do get paid to work on basic income. It's another thing that we do because we think it matters, and a big part of why I'm interested in basic income is around work and how we conceptualize it. Why is it that we don't get the means that we need to survive from doing work that needs to be done? I think that's probably the key thing for me, that like being a mother. Work needs to be done. Thank you.
Right, yeah. Erin, it was really the UBI Lab Network, or people from the UBI Lab Network, that kind of kicked off. I know we had a meeting in early March, but then in terms of the WhatsApp group, it was really Johnny Ross Tatum who kicked that off. I don't know if you want to say anything about a bit more in depth about the UBI Lab Network, what it's for, what are people doing, that sort of thing.
Yes, I certainly can do. And apologies in advance to any Sheffield colleagues who are watching this, because I will probably miss out a lot. Because an awful lot of work has been particularly led by UBI Lab Sheffield, and they deserve a lot of credit for the work that they've done both on raising the profile of basic income, but also on working on the UBI proposal and the recovery UBI proposal. The UBI Lab Network is really, I'm really pleased that we're part of it, and I'm a relative newcomer in Kirklees to the UBI Lab Network. And what I think a real strength is how every area that has a UBI lab has done something slightly different with it. So Sheffield is the first one, and they've done a lot of work around, as I say, drafting proposals, passing a motion through their local council, Sheffield City Council, on supporting a UBI Lab pilot, a UBI pilot there. And prior to the 2019 election, they were instrumental in getting a basic income trial included in the Labour Party manifesto, which meant that several of the major parties in the UK went into that election with a commitment to something around UBI, whether that was introducing a full UBI or a commitment to a pilot or just some kind of commitment to looking at the idea further. I think it's a real, as I say, it's a real strength that every area that has a UBI Lab has done something slightly different with it, because I think one crucial thing about this as a concept, and one thing that really fascinates me about it, is that you can apply it to almost any situation. And so I think it's a real strength of the movement in the UK that we have a lot of disparate groups led by people from different political traditions. So obviously I'm a Labour councillor. The UBI Lab in Hull is largely driven by 2 Liberal Democrat councillors. We've got a lot of Green Party buy-in as well, as you would expect, obviously SNP up in Scotland. I think that's a real strength of the movement in the UK, and it's meant that we've largely been able to strike that balance between political engagement and pushing through different levels of government, but also civic engagement as well, because certainly the UBI Lab that we founded in Kirklees, the membership of that is very much local residents, which I think is a huge strength. As I say, I've probably missed out a lot of the development of the movement and of the network, but it's growing all the time. I think we welcomed our 14th UBI Lab today or yesterday in Cardiff, and we have UBI Labs as far afield as Bucharest and Jakarta. So it's not just a UK thing, although certainly most of the UBI Labs are in the UK. It is interesting to me as well that most of them are in what you would perhaps class as the most deprived areas of the UK as well. We have had a bit of discussion around why has it taken such a hold in the north of England. And actually, I think if you look at government spending over the last decade, it's pretty clear why an idea like basic income would take such a hold in the north of England. But that seems to be coming largely through the UBI Lab Network, which, as I say, is a network of groups who work quite collegiately together.
Great, thank you, Erin. That was brilliant. Cleo, do you want to talk about basic income conversation and what's happening with that?
Yes, thank you. So the Basic Income Conversation is a new part of Compass, which is an existing organisation who are very focused on good society, how we can shift politically and through policy and through grassroots action. And they decided they wanted to do more on basic income. They've been talking about it for a while and wanted to do more of the engagement part. So obviously the UBI Labs are doing incredible work on setting up groups and really mobilizing people and kind of putting structure to that. And I think we just, the more resource possible to bring people in and to help people discover the idea, but also to bring in the research aspects to the movement. So there's so much to understand. There's so many interactions for something as big as basic income. And actually, it means something different for different groups. So our main focus is on civil society engagement, working with different parts of civil society. So, for example, women, the environment, people with disabilities, and to really interrogate what does a basic income need to do for these groups and how can the movement best represent those needs to make sure that we're advocating for a basic income that really does work for everyone, because it goes to everyone, so it needs to work for everyone. So that's our main focus at the moment. We also work with a research network to inform that, and now the political network, which we're here to talk about today. And we work with, of course, Basic Income UK and the UBI Labs network, because why wouldn't you? One's such wonderful people.
Yeah. But you guys have been doing most of the parliamentary work. Do you want to describe a little bit about that and how? I mean, I probably should say to people first that we were kind of caught on. I mean, everybody, I think, because the petitions were individuals who just went and did it, right? And then we had to kind of run around catching up with who they were and how to do it. Okay, so it was a little bit of a scramble, I have to say, at the beginning of or sort of middle of March or so. but yeah, so Compass has been doing most of the parliamentary work. Do you want to just talk about
Yeah,
that a
sure.
little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been really exciting to see things crop up of their own accord, and I think that did start actually even within the politics stuff. There were a couple of MPs who really took a leadership role in pushing for this down south, and there was an early day motion and a letter that was signed by a lot of MPs, and that was kind of the starting point for this political work. So yeah, in collaboration again with Basic Income UK and the UBI Labs, we just sent an email to everyone, I think, that had signed the early day motion and said, can we coordinate a call here? Can we speak to you? Can we get a sense of what your interest is here and what you want to do next? And so I think the two key parts have been noticing action and engagement, and then trying to think about how do we escalate that, like what could come next, what do we think would be beneficial to come next, and how can we facilitate that, how can we reduce the barrier as much as possible for people to get them to do stuff next. So largely the political work has been a facilitator. We've just made sure that people are coming together and having this conversation and are being pushed to take another action. We've been fairly neutral with what we've been asking people to do. We've, rather than telling people here's the thing that you need to be asking for, here's the model, it's been, you have to be quite patient with it, I guess, because there's people that are long-term advocates that are up for a full basic income permanently, and there's people that are now new to this idea, or not new to the idea, but new to supporting it, whereas previously they would never have said yes to basic income. In this context, they now are. So again, playing the middle ground a little bit, making sure they're talking to each other and doing the pushing of each other themselves, but finding something that everyone can put their name behind, because that's where the impact has come from, really. So yeah,
That's great. Yeah.
Go on.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think the cross-party support for this has been really key. So yeah, cool. Jamie, do you want to talk about, I don't know, how, I mean, there was massive SMP support for the various parliamentary initiatives. I don't know how much, I mean, like, how is that working, and is that putting off people from other parties, or what's the?
No, I think the critical thing in Scotland, so we've seen, although it's been an area that's been discussed for many years and a number of key figures have been involved, it really is over those last 3 years that the kind of discussion has really taken off in serious terms. And it was 2017 in the programme for government that the Scottish Government, led by the SNP, laid out their plan to commit money to feasibility work. So it's quite a recent development, but I think what's been critical in Scotland, and actually this, is very similar to what we're now seeing in England and elsewhere, is that the debate has been led by civic society, by academia, by local government, rather than by national government and party politics. And I think that's been really important, because it's allowed the space that you don't instantly have to jump into, is this an SNP or a Labour or a Lib Dem policy? Actually, you can just engage in these critical issues that Erin outlined earlier, that are impacting on people's lives, and actually therefore we want to find ways to respond to them. I think as well in Scotland, our big fault line, I suppose, in politics just now is still on the Constitution. Now, in one sense, basic income plays to that, because we can't deliver a basic income in Scotland. We can't actually deliver experiments in Scotland as it stands just now, because we have about 15% of the social security budget devolved to the control of the Scottish Government. Obviously, that means that to take anything forward, we're reliant upon DWP, so Department of Work and Pensions, in the UK government, and a UK government that is at this stage still opposed to the idea of basic income. So it creates challenges for us there, some of which say that therefore we need change to the situation we're in. Obviously, one direction of travel for that is independence, but actually you can also look at more federal systems, more devolution of power, and opportunities for testing things out. I think even had we seen a change in administration at the last general election, given the commitment to experiments from the UK Labour Party, it would have opened up the door for an SNP-led Scottish government to also test things out. So I think there's space there. I think it hasn't become too party political, although as the government and the SNP become ever more supportive, and every day now we're seeing articles, we're seeing public statements from senior SNP figures supporting the idea as a policy, as I say, not just as an experiment. It does obviously push elements of party politics to kind of push back against that. But I'm hoping, with the great effort we've seen from, many Labour folk, particularly in the north of England, as we're seeing from Liberal Democrat colleagues south of the border, if they can help encourage their Scottish colleagues to fully jump on board, I think that'll be really positive. And it's worth noting that Fife Council, which is an area to the north of Edinburgh in Scotland, which has really been the leading area for basic income discussions since really about 2015. That the support for trying basic income in Fife was cross-party support in the council. So that was all the political parties saying, we believe this is worthwhile. And I think that's where we create a really powerful space for dialogue, where we find that ground to actually recognise that people from different parts of the political spectrum can actually engage with the core principles of basic income as a policy.
Myself, great, thanks. Maggie, do you want to talk about what's happened more in Brighton? How did you manage to get your petition signed so quickly? And yeah, whatever else you want to say, basically. About
yes, so the petition was written by myself and Green Party Councillor Martin Osborne. As somebody said earlier, there's interesting cross-party support. I'm quite good at badgering people. Possibly that's why I got signatures so soon, because I think if you talk to people and you see quite a lot of times if someone posts a link to something to do with basic income on Twitter or whatever, immediately comments will come in from people saying, oh, why's all this money being given to rich people and how do you do this? And and then if you answer their questions, they start to see the worth and the validity of it. Yeah, I mean, I've got a personal petition calling for greater peer support for mums. So I think I tapped into quite a few women I know locally and further afield, just getting them to see the importance of this. So yeah, it's July is the next full council meeting. I don't know if it'll be an actual one or a virtual one, and I've never attended one, so I've no idea how it runs. Brighton is the 8th council, I think, to call for a trial. I'm not sure with the other 7 at what point, how far along they got. I guess it varied. Some would have actually passed the motion and approached government. Others perhaps got rebuffed. And obviously 2 months down the line, who knows where we'll be. We might be further with a recovery basic income and we won't need a trial. Yeah, we shall see. What was nice, we were supposed to have a kind of a meeting of our Southeast group towards the end of March, which probably would have been attended by a few people. As it was, it moved online and we tapped into the whole basic income team and the UBI Lab Network all across the country. And that's been one of the best things about this, I think, has been the coming together of so many different ideas and people from all around the country. And it's made us a lot stronger.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, so just to ask people, if you want to, if you're on Zoom, then please put, say hi and put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A. If you're on FB, then someone's monitoring that, so you can put questions there. And also on Twitter, someone's following that. So we'll try to get to questions if we have more of them. But maybe what we could do then is kind of explore more like what, in terms of like, how do we carry this forward? I think, certainly one of the big thrills for me has been to watch the UBI Lab Network and also some local groups with Basic Income UK kind of develop and grow and kind of proliferate around, because I mean, I think it's really important to show that people from all parts of the country are actually, wanting basic income. And yeah, so I don't know, Erin, maybe you can talk about sort of how UBI Lab Network has grown and what kinds of tools are offered by UBI Lab Network.
Yeah, certainly. So I think for me at least, when I set up our local UBI Lab group, one of the great things about being part of the network was that you didn't have to go over old ground. You know, if you needed orders from something as simple as a logo, right through to some quite complex letters to politicians and policymakers, some of that ground had already been covered, particularly by colleagues in Sheffield and Liverpool at that point. They were quite far ahead in terms of lobbying their local council and just establishing the practical framework for a group. That was something I found really helpful. And just being able to have that discussion around, okay, so what's already being done and what does that mean is missing? So actually, when we set up UBI Lab Kirklees, one of the things that I taught colleagues about was the engagement with civic society, because both in Liverpool and in Sheffield, they had really quite understandably pushed at lobbying their local councils, and they'd made a lot of really great headway doing that. And actually, it felt like a good point to say, okay, maybe that now means that we need to look further afield. And it's interesting what Maggie was saying earlier about being able to tap into cross signatories of the petition around better peer support for mums, because I've got 2 children under 2. And when I was sharing some of the work that was going into setting up UBI Lab Kirklees, because I'm a total dad, all my social media is full of mum groups. And actually, it was an incredibly positive response, particularly around things like the return to work. And I think that was something that, purely because of where I was in my life at the time, was perhaps an avenue that at that point hadn't really been looked at so much by the more, I suppose, political arms of the movement. And it was really interesting to see that within the Labour Party, I started to get quite a lot of flack for being a supporter of basic income. You know, it wasn't party policy at that time. The most we'd said was John McDonnell said he would look at a pilot. And so it was quite surreal to get people who I agreed on everything else politically with saying, how can you support basic income? And actually all the mums you on Facebook going, this would be a fantastic idea, this would make such a difference to my life. You know, it would have meant I didn't have to sleep train my baby, I could have taken an extra month off work, I could have kept breastfeeding, you know, all these sort of very real and tangible things that make such a difference in that period. And I suppose that's where a lot of my interest comes in. And I think if we're talking about a way forward, we have to not lose that. We have to be able to think about what might be going on in people's lives that we can start to discuss with them and start to think about how would a basic income change that? How would it make it better? What would you do with it if you had it? And certainly in terms of the network, I think that's something that we discuss quite a lot in terms of what are the issues in our local areas and how would a basic income affect that? Obviously, at the moment, we're in this kind of crisis caused by the coronavirus, and that's quite rightly coming front and centre. But I think moving forward, we have to start thinking about all those other real life issues as well, because in my experience of setting up a local group, that was what people on the ground wanted to talk about.
And you, right. Okay. Jamie, I don't know if you want to talk more about the situation in Scotland. Maybe also talk about like some of the holes in the current system. All right. You know, so the government has put forward a big package of extra money. And we're suddenly seeing that, you know, when they want to spend money, they certainly can. Okay. But, you know, maybe talk about that, and then also, you know, sort of what the situation is in Scotland and how you see things moving forward there.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on there. And I think this is a critical aspect, is that we've been told, particularly over the last kind of decades, that there is no money, it's austerity, we have to tighten our belts. And it's amazing how suddenly in crisis, particularly for certain segments of society, money can appear at great speed and at great levels. You know, and the economist Francis Coppola has talked about the need for quantitative easing for the people rather than just for corporations, as we've seen before. So I think for me, one of the things that it's felt to me, and others may or may not agree with this, but it's felt like a lot of the approaches, particularly from the UK government during this beginning stage of the crisis, have been about trying to defer things down the road. I think in the hope that it will start to clear up and they'll actually not have to deliver the support. So we start to see with the furlough scheme that, it passes the pressure to others to make decisions and to cut wages and so on. The support wasn't there at all really for self-employed people to start with. And then when it kind of grudgingly was introduced, it was again pushed far down the line. So it's actually people are trying to survive in the here and now and are having to wait weeks and weeks until they can access it. And yet actually in many ways what that's done is start to show to a far bigger part of society the day-to-day experience that people have been going through with universal credits. So the social security system for the United Kingdom, where you are forced to wait for money to justify your needs for support and to receive it, to jump through hoops. Now, interestingly, because suddenly we have a lot more people having to look towards things like universal credit for support, much like you said, Barb, with the sudden appearance of the magic money tree, we've also suddenly realized that the waiting times, the sanctions and the punishments that we have been told are essential to make people behave appropriately can actually be removed because they make no sense and they are there as a political and an ideological point rather than because that's how the system works. And I think that experience of the reality that for the vast majority of us maybe have never come into contact with on a day-to-day basis, I think it's starting to push into a wider part of society than perhaps would have engaged with basic income before. And I think we're starting to see, and I think we'll see more of this as we move forward, that growth of public understanding and support. Much as Erin touched on there with the network of mums saying this is a really good thing, it would really help us. People are starting to engage with the idea. It's not an abstract policy or political decision. They're seeing the impact it's having on people on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's where it has picked up this sudden support from politicians, because they can see that actually, had we gone into this crisis with a basic income in place, we would be in a better position than we are now. People would have had more security. We wouldn't have seen the same level of people being forced to stay in work through sheer necessity. Many businesses are struggling. Many businesses are going to shut because of this. Others, not mentioning Amazon by name, are doing incredibly well during this process and are relying for that. And we're all making use of it, or many of us are, and we're shopping and we're buying. This is being delivered by real people, usually operating under gig economy approaches, and who are putting a huge amount of pressure over the decisions that they can make. So for me, I think in Scotland, but also further afield, this is really about humanising things that many of us have been talking about for quite some time now. It's about giving them that really practical and much more universal understanding now. And it's also throwing into light many of the, frankly, quite poor attacks that we hear in basic income and showing that they're not very legitimate, whether that be around cost. Well, actually, the money can flow when we need it to, whether it be the old chestnut of whether everyone's going to be lazy and stay at home. The experience of lockdown so far is that we're all desperately keen to get back out to contribute and support. But I think as well, it also shows that there are parts of society in Scotland and in elsewhere who have not been supported up until now. I think carers are a particularly key example of that. And I think, and this is something I know Cleo and I have had conversations with folk on Twitter and elsewhere, it's about also opening up that discussion now. So this can't just be that we all go, great, we've won the argument, let's make it happen. How do we ensure that as many different people contribute into creating policies and ideas and ways forward that mean we do build back better out of this, and we actually create something a lot more robust, resilient, and progressive moving forward and for future crises that will arise.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Jamie. That was a great synopsis. Erin, you had your hand up, and then I'll bring in Maggie after that.
Yeah, thank you. I think another thing that it's done is remove a lot of the negative points around blame. So a lot of the time when you would talk about introducing a basic income that gives everyone the same amount of money unconditionally, you would get that initial kickback of, well, what about people who don't do anything to deserve it? I think that you sort of touched on that earlier, but actually when you've got a situation where the government is telling you not to go to work, actually that then leaves the question, well, how am I going to eat then? And I think that's really part of the discussion, particularly around recovery UBI for me. But also I think what this current crisis has done is it's almost shortened everyone's horizons. So what most people are worried about, at least that I speak to right now, is their family. They have somebody in particular that they're worried about. They have a vulnerable family member. They have their elderly grandparents. They're just generally worried about a group of people, care workers, key workers, elderly people. And I think that has really brought it home for a lot of people as to what is really important. And certainly a basic income gives you the opportunity to prioritise what you think is really important. And I think a lot of people that I know are certainly thinking about work almost now as an impediment to them spending time with people that they love, that they've been forced to spend time with. And I think that, in policy terms, that can sound quite woolly, but for a lot of people, that's really, really important. And I think if we don't, there is an absolute political imperative to winning the emotional argument. It's perhaps not as provable as costs and the economic side of things, but it's important when it comes to getting people mobilised. And I think that's another thing that the current crisis has done as well. It's really brought that home for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. Thanks. Maggie, did you want to add anything? I've just unmuted you.
Yeah, just building on what you were saying, Erin, this sort of idea of the undeserving poor, which all of us at the moment are undeserving poor because we're all not living the kind of life we could live. I think we're so brainwashed into thinking that the only way we can get by in life is by doing a job, to get the money, to buy the things we need. So it's like, well, we don't have to do that. People are way more generous than I think right-wing press might choose to believe. I mean, look at in the UK, massive, I think up to about 1 million people wanted to sign up to help volunteer for the NHS or, do other vital tasks. People actually want to contribute to their communities. They're not inherently selfish. And I think if we had the generosity to treat people as equal, as indeed this virus has shown, no one is immune from getting it. Now is the time to sort of say we are all as one. So let's treat everybody equally, reward them by a basic income and move on.
Great, thank you. Cleo, did you have anything to add? There was one question in the chat box, so I'll take that in a minute, but if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, always add something. I think in the most horrendous circumstances that I don't think anyone advocating for a basic income would ever have asked for, I do think this crisis makes everyone consider these fundamental questions about work. We actively are being told not to work, despite the fact that it's going to bring a significant percentage of businesses around the world to their knees. We're being told that it's not safe for us. And again, this is the experience for people all the time. There are some people that work is damaging to them because of the way that we've set up the institutions of work that we have. And these are the people that are referred to as the undeserving poor, and lazy people that I just find it boggles my mind. Carers have already been mentioned, mothers have already been mentioned. We all depend on these people, and we're now seeing how our lives and our jobs interact with theirs, and how no one, they can't stop. They can't stop right now, and their economic situation is the same as it always is. And people who have never experienced that lack of support or help financially are now having to interact with that. So, there's a big portion of the middle class that are having to apply for benefits for the first time in their lives. And they're scared of the systems because they know that they're punitive. They know that they don't function the way that they should. And this is a real moment for us and for this conversation, because they should be converts to basic income. And I think this is a big question about infrastructure, like Jamie mentioned. If we had the system for delivering a basic income, we could have made sure that everyone was fine immediately. We could have delivered something then. And I think that potentially is the right political ask at the moment, is at least put in place the infrastructure. And that's why, again, the recovery basic income is such an interesting concept for people who are quite boldly able to talk about it, where previously, like Erin said, from their own political colleagues, they would have been told not to because it's too big or it's too radical. Right now, they can be really big and really radical because they have to be. We all have to be. So yeah, just another note on infrastructure from within the basic income movement in a really practical way. The work that we've been doing, I think, has shifted a little bit by thinking about our infrastructure differently. So petitions like 38 Degrees have been amazing for reaching big numbers of people, getting like these numbers that are really flashy on a statement that we can put out. But actually you don't have access to the data then. You can't get in touch with everyone that signed that petition, which is fine. But that's part of the reason that we've done these other types of petition using infrastructure that does give you access to the data, because then you can ask people who have switched on to the debate right now to do something else. So whether that's down the line, host a conversation in their community, so we can continue to really open up this conversation rather than speaking on people's behalf, just getting them to speak to each other, or encouraging that. You can ask them to write that to their MPs. I don't know, that I think is useful to know if we're all advocating for basic income, to think about it really practically and to think about how we can reach as many people as possible in this moment where it's getting a lot of attention.
Great, thank you, Cleo. Just a note on that. Yeah, I recently had an article published in the Canary about this, and I forgot to mention 38 Degrees, which is terrible, because in fact it was their petition which got over 250,000 people, and then people would get an acknowledgement that they'd signed it, and in that acknowledgement was the Parliament petition. And I think that's how we got to over 100,000 signatories on the Parliament petition after that. Sorry, Erin, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get through without being interrupted. So just to come back to the point about how people are realising that the benefit system is punitive, I think that's really interesting, because I think 6 months ago, if you'd asked your average person on the street, is the benefit system in this country punitive, they'd have probably said no. They'd have probably said no, in fact, it's too generous. You can get it by, getting pregnant and having a baby. You can get it by being an immigrant or an asylum seeker. Too many people get benefits. It's too easy to get benefits. People get benefits who don't deserve them. When I've worked hard all my life, that kind of narrative wasn't uncommon. I think now you're getting those very people having to apply for it and finding out, actually, this is hellish. This is really, really hard. This is asking things of me that are just untenable, and those are the kind of things that not that long ago would have had you labelled as a raving lefty for saying, and I think that if anything is the really important shift of opinion, that you have people who would never have come into contact with the welfare system because they were nice middle class people who had good jobs, who had done everything right and therefore didn't need it, and actually they're finding out now that when you have to, it's not that fun. It's not that generous. And at worst, it's punitive social engineering. And I think if there is going to be a big push for change, it's going to come from that shift in public opinion.
Right. Okay. Well, we're 15 minutes to go. We did have a question about a common plan. Do people have? And I know that isn't the case, that we have a common plan. Okay. We have a huge multiplicity of plans. Do people think that's a problem, or is that actually a strength, or what do you think? Maggie, do you have anything to say about that? No. Okay. Okay. Maybe Jamie, and then Cleo.
Thanks. Yeah, personally, I think having a variety of plans just now is quite beneficial, because it allows people to approach it from different perspectives. I think the critical aspect, in a sense, for us is twofold. One is starting to have really grown up and kind of wide-ranging discussions about where money comes from and how we're going to use it. And I think whether traditionally maybe this has been solely focused through income tax, I think it's about starting to look at how we generate revenue in general. So looking at things like data, looking at land value taxation, looking at environmental taxation. So I think having a broader discussion there, which fits into the fact that, basic income is not a panacea, it's not a utopian standalone policy, it's a foundation that we build on top of. And so it will interact and should interact with other policy areas. I think the other thing is making sure that we open up the space to actually look at the different forms of basic income, but maybe keep ourselves united on the key aspects of it we want to see. So the delivery, the actual policy maybe can vary from area to area, from party to party, But there are versions of a basic income, at least in name. And I think we have to be very clear that as it becomes more popular, more people will stick the name on their own pet projects. But there are versions of a basic income that could be quite destructive, that could be quite negative, that could be used, you know, the traditional one would be maybe the kind of libertarian approach in the US, where you scrap everything and you just give a basic income. I would say that the majority of us, from my experience in the discussion, certainly in the UK, that's not the approach we're coming from. But I think if we can maybe agree at least the core principles, so, you know, we have those laid out around universality and unconditionality, but the impact we want it to have, then maybe that helps to keep us on the same platform, the same space, even if how we get there and how we deliver it in practice can have variations and changes within it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, that's really also been the strength of having so many local groups and, you know, people trying to, you know, kind of work out what's best for their locality. Cleo, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think a big part of what we've had to work with across the UK the last few weeks is kind of the reality that the current government aren't interested in basic income, and as much progress as we've made and as, you know, as exciting as this has been, when it gets to the Conservative Party, it's always a no, and it's the same old boring answers that Jamie mentioned earlier. Like, they're not valid responses, but they are the ones that currently hold the controls. So yeah, at this point, I think it's the proposals that we're putting forward being a little bit open-ended. I think that is good. There being lots of proposals, again, I think it's good. It gives you a chance to show that this is proper policy making. This isn't utopian nonsense. This is a policy that can be designed in countless different ways for different purposes and with different outcomes, and that we're talking about those really seriously. Yeah, that this is exactly the perfect thing at the moment, that is what's happening, and that we're really getting people to take that seriously and to think about it, because I think it gets dismissed out of hand quite quickly, quite frequently, which is frustrating, rather than it being taken seriously and digging below the surface of like, how would it actually work, rather than, oh, it wouldn't work, which is often people's main problem with it. I like the idea, but it would never work in practice. We're seeing now, we're getting people to stay in the conversation long enough to look at a proposal. So having lots of those in different formats, I think, is really important. And then the other thing, the biggest proposal that the UK has ever had for an experiment is going to come from the feasibility study group up in Scotland, who have been looking at an experiment for the last couple of years, like it's already been mentioned. And I think for me, the thing that I'm most excited about seeing from that final report is what the specific barriers are to a basic income. So again, you need to have a model in mind to know how you would implement it, and that's exactly what the Scottish Government project has done with an experiment. So we will know why we could not do a basic income experiment very soon, and this applies to everywhere in the UK. And for me, that's really crucial. We need to know what it is that we're asking for, and it's for those barriers to be removed. And I completely agree with what Jamie was saying just then about how do you make sure everyone is talking about the right kind of basic income, one that does meet the needs of these people who are most vulnerable. And the values of a basic income have been at the core of the feasibility study work, which is, I think it's just so exciting that has been the way that they've done this research, was to think about how do you define technically stuff that's quite qualitative in this kind of work. You know, and that includes scoping existing as evidence. My colleague Marcia Gibson has done a fantastic scoping report on basic income evidence around the world as part of the feasibility study. And again, this comes from a place of the values. So I think they've shown that it really is possible to talk about basic income coming from a framework, a technical framework that embodies the values of it, and how it could, you know, be designed to do something worth doing.
Right, great. Yeah, we've had a question about what are the next from Mike Mosley. So what are the next steps to take? I'll take a round on that one, and then we'll probably finish. So anyone want to start with that? Maggie, do you want to say anything?
Well, next steps, yeah, I take Cleo's point exactly, is that each time we think, yeah, we're really making big strides, we get a knockback from the Conservative government. I mean, we know that there are Conservatives who do actually support this. So I think, to be honest, we just got to keep doing more of all of the things we're doing. More petitions, more labs setting up, more articles, more answering stuff online, more of this kind of thing. Just keep it getting louder and louder and louder, getting more and more people. There's quite a few MPs. Mari Black is one that springs to mind, who was opposed and now isn't. So, I think if we just keep going, and this crisis keeps going, and the more, as somebody was saying, it was Erin, wasn't it, the middle class people who've actually discovered they have to apply for benefits like the people they look down on, I think the greater the chance that change could come.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Any other offers for what to do next? Or even just
I'll go. Sorry, am I jumping in?
Oh,
I think we just have to see the moment. To be honest, I think we were talking about if there had been a shift in Labour Party policy towards basic income, having gone from a commitment to a pilot in the 2019 general election through to Keir Starmer now saying, I'm not looking at it now, but we might look at it maybe in the future. And I think the point was then that we have to make basic income the politically easy option. And absolutely what Maggie was saying, what a lot of that involves is a tangible shift in public opinion. Actually, under normal circumstances, and granted we're not in normal circumstances anymore, but we have to make it a very easy thing and a non-controversial thing for politicians who want to be seen as credible to say that they support basic income. And I think we are getting there, and that there won't almost be a point where we know we've got there, but I think we are reaching that point, that critical mass of politicians who are willing to say they support it and not risk immediately getting laughed at. I think that's really important, and I think as well to keep building that coalition of progressive thinking around what we want a UBI. What we want a UBI for. I don't support UBI for its own sake. I support it as a very efficient mechanism for delivering social justice for people that have been denied that for far too long. The crystallizing moment for me around basic income came when I looked at a map and realised that the most deprived street in my ward had been the most deprived street 50 years ago. Nothing had changed. All that had happened was it had got slightly less bad to live on those streets up and down when government spent a bit more on it. And there was a whole industry of poverty that always put the burden of being poor onto people who were poor. It made them apply for more stuff. They had to register for more schemes. They had to tick more boxes, when by definition they were the least able to do that. And that's why I support a UBI. You can use the UBI to underpin any social system that you want. I want it to underpin a progressive social system that prioritises people that have been forgotten for all my lifetime and more. And I think we have to keep pushing that point and building the coalition in this country around that. Otherwise, the idea gets away from us and the moment gets away from us.
Right, brilliant. Cleo, you wanted to add, there was a question in the Q&A. I mean, it's quite a big one, given a minimum number of participants necessary for an experiment to have robust results. I think that's kind of a detailed question. And maybe we can
Scottish experiment have, the last report suggested 17,000 people, which is massive and amazing and would be really robust data. So yeah, I probably couldn't even answer that, what the minimum one is, but there may well be that information in the report. So we can share that maybe afterwards, the link to the.
Sure, yeah. And Jamie, you had something to say, and then I'll have to wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think to jump in on that, there's been a lot of debate around experiments in general. Do we want experiments? Are they beneficial? And I think they certainly, for us, I think in a lot of our discussions were and can be in a certain circumstance. But it seems to me that what's becoming really powerful is the stories. So if you look at the Canadian experiment in Ontario that was cancelled very suddenly by a change in political leadership, the collecting of stories and the impact it had on people, really ties into what Erin was talking about there. The real life difference this makes to people, even in an experiment that was cancelled. And so I think, the ambition of the Scottish feasibility study, I think, is fantastic. The work they've put together is really exciting, as Cleo said. But if a 17,000 person experiment plus 17,000 in a control group is not going to be deliverable, through the chaos we're in, constitutional debate, costs, whatever else, I think we can still look at smaller opportunities to start to look at the stories of the impact this makes on people. And that's what I find talking to a lot of folk here in Scotland and in other countries is really what captures people's attention. So going exactly to what Erin said there, living in a city like Glasgow, which is flourishing, it's an incredible city, and has pockets of deprivation that have been there for decade upon decade upon decade, that have seen really well-meaning policy attempts that have just replicated each other with the same lack of impact. And so I think there's actually a real desire for new ideas and radicalism for taking this forward, and that plays really nicely. So for me, it's about the next steps are about focusing on that civic drive around bringing together this coalition of different people, all of us wanting to see a better world grow out of this, and using that as the impetus to bring the politicians along with us so they can help us deliver what we need at the end of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. Cleo, you have one little thing to say?
Yeah, sorry, just about next steps. Like I saw someone say that a big multiplicity of plans isn't a plan. And I do agree with that. I think the movement, the basic income movement in the UK needs to have one plan. But for me at the moment, it's still not a policy proposal. We're not there yet. We just need to have a plan for convincing people, then institutions, and then government that a basic income needs to be implemented. And I think it's been a joy to work with everyone over the last few weeks on a plan for the first time, which, I think has been really important, and more of that, as Maggie says, more of it all.
I think certainly for me, I think it's been more a question of like sticking to the principles of basic income rather than having a particular plan. I mean, there's certainly, there are a lot of different ways to pay for it. There are, different levels that we can discuss, and there's been a lot of work done on that. So I think, just acknowledging, in fact, this work goes back over 30 years. And I think the fact that we don't, there isn't like one plan also keeps us from, it kind of helps us all work together. So we're not kind of wasting time kind of arguing about whether the money should come from here or there, or we're not arguing about whether it should be £97 a week or whether it should be £150 a week or whatever. We're very clear that, this is a payment to each individual, which will allow participation in society and a lot of other things to happen. So, again, in answer to, why not a plan, I have to say, I was chair of UBI Europe for about 3 years between 2014 and 2017. And, a lot of the groups in different countries and the movements in different countries, the key thing that they argued about was the details of a particular plan. So, without saying, obviously we will need a plan at some point, okay, to try to all get behind. It's very important that we really, that our first concern is the principles of basic income and getting those out to society, getting grassroots support for the idea. And then we'll see. We're not even at the kind of power at this point where we can enforce any particular plan whatsoever. So, I think it's been fantastic these last few weeks in particular. The fact that we've been forced online, in fact, has actually kind of facilitated our meeting, rather than trying to get together in some physical place. We've been, and I have to say that besides, I've always been a skeptic, a WhatsApp skeptic, but I'm totally converted now. In terms of it being a kind of lively place, and I've used other platforms and they just kind of don't really work somehow. So it's been a huge joy to be working with so many people across the country over the last month, and, and really consistently as well. I'm very, very happy to, have chaired this particular panel, and I hope that we have more. What else? I'm supposed to say some other stuff here. Hold on. So just to say that Basic Income Europe has its own petition for an emergency basic income. If somebody else could put that in the chat box, that would be great. Oh, we started screen sharing. What's going on here? Okay, yeah, so this is who we were. And yeah, so there's the petition. Anybody can sign this, and it doesn't matter now that the UK's sort of halfway out of Europe. You can still sign this petition. And they are, UBIE is building up to do another European Citizens Initiative, which unfortunately here in the UK, we won't be able to support so much, except maybe by social media and stuff. And yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to UBIE for hosting this session. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you to all the panelists. You all had great things to say. And the next one will be about cash for Corona in Spain. There were a lot of headlines about how Spain was offering basic income, and it turned out not quite to be true. Just to Jamie's point earlier about, you know, a lot of different things being called basic income, which aren't really. And so Lerda Rancon will be discussing this with Isabel Franco and Julian Bolan, who've been huge voices for basic income in Spain, and really look forward to watching that next week. So thank you very much and goodbye.